and Millionaire received a late-night hushed call from his daughter. Mom told me not to say anything to anyone. The following event sent the father into a panic, prompting an immediate call to 911. 9 o'clock in the evening. The only sound left in the Seattle office was the faint continuous hum of the central climate control system. Ethan Caldwell's gaze was fixed on his computer screen. The Excel sheet displayed perfectly aligned columns of green numbers. The system had already marked the monthly support payment for Marianne and Lily as completed. Ethan gave a slight nod. He appreciated this level of precision. To him, being a father meant ensuring all material needs were consistently met, not a second late. His personal cell phone slid softly across the glass desk, emitting a sharp, dry vibration. Ethan glanced at it. An unfamiliar number not stored in his contacts. He reached out to decline the call. His virtual conference with his Tokyo partners was due to start in 3 minutes. He wasn't in the habit of taking calls from strangers at this hour. Just as his finger touched the red button, the screen went dark, then immediately lit up again, the same number. The caller was persistent. This tenacity bothered the meticulous order he had just established. Ethan picked up, maintaining his usual cool and professional tone. Ethan speaking. There was no verbal response, only the sound of breathing. A peculiar, hurried and heavy sound, as if someone was desperately trying to pull air into their lungs without making a sound. "Who is this?" Ethan asked again, his other hand poised over the mouse to disconnect the call. "Daddy." Ethan's hand froze mid-air. "Lily." He leaned against the edge of the desk, his voice dropping. "Whose number are you using? What's going on?" A rustling sound came from the other end, fabric rubbing against something hard. It sounded like the little girl was hiding in a confined space, a closet perhaps, or under a bed. "Listen to me, Dad." Lily's voice was shaky, rapid, and fractured. "Mom said I can't tell anyone, absolutely nobody." "Tell me what?" "Where is your mother?" "I'm scared." The sentence didn't sound like a child's simple complaint. It sounded like a confession. Ethan felt his heart start to pound forcefully, shattering his usual calm rhythm. "Lily, listen to me. Are you home? Is Mom there?" "I shouldn't have called," Lily whispered, her voice fading. Footsteps sounded in the background, very faint but clearly audible through the phone speaker. The footsteps were getting closer to her location. "I have to disconnect now. Mom is coming in." "Wait, Lily, turn on the speakerphone or..." A sharp, cold dial tone signaled the call was terminated. The phone screen went dark. Ethan shot to his feet. He stared at the phone. The office space suddenly felt stifling and irrelevant. The numbers on the Excel sheet became worthless clutter. He hit redial. The number was unreachable. Ethan grabbed his jacket and strode out of the office. His assistant looked up, surprised to see his boss leave right before a meeting. "Mr. Caldwell, the Japanese partners are waiting to connect. Cancel it." Ethan didn't turn back. He dialed 911 as he stepped into the elevator. The connection tone sounded. 911, what is your emergency? "I need to report a situation. I suspect a well-being concern." Ethan hesitated. He was a man who always had all the data before presenting an issue, but now he had nothing. "My daughter just called." She was frantic. "I believe there is an issue at my ex-wife's residence." "Sir, is your daughter hurt? Has there been a break-in?" "I don't know." Ethan tightened his grip on the phone. The elevator doors opened, and the cold draft from the building lobby hit his face. "All I know is she was terrified. Send someone to check, right now. The address is..." 15 minutes later, Ethan was in a taxi hurtling down the highway toward SeaTac Airport. Heavy rain began to fall, lashing the car window and forming streaky marks. The taxi driver looked into the rearview mirror, seeing his impeccably dressed passenger sitting motionless, his eyes glued to his phone screen. A new text message appeared. Sender Marianne. Lily is asleep. Everything's fine. You don't need to worry. He didn't reply. His thumb quickly swept across the screen, erasing the notification as if to delete the lie staring him in the face. Ethan called the West Precinct Police Department again. He needed to hear the voice of an authority figure, someone with no reason to mislead him. Police Department, how may I help you? This is Ethan Caldwell. I reported a situation at the Maple Street address earlier. Have you sent someone yet? A patrol unit is en route, sir. Please hold or wait for an update. I'm heading to the airport. I need the results as soon as you arrive there. We will follow protocol to update you. The call ended. Ethan leaned his head back against the cold leather seat of the taxi. The car swerved into the drop-off lane at SeaTac. He paid the fare, grabbed his bag, and merged into the sparse crowd of late-night travelers. The 4 hours on the airplane were the longest in Ethan's life. He remembered Lily's voice. Mom told me not to say anything. That was not the tone of a child who had a bad dream. It was the sound of compliance. Ethan opened his laptop to review old photos of Lily saved in the cloud. In the pictures from the last 2 years, Lily rarely smiled with the bright joy she used to have. She often stood rigidly, her arms and legs always correctly positioned, looking straight at the camera, but lacking any playful mischief. Ethan had once thought it was maturity, the composure of a well-raised young lady. Looking back now, he saw vigilance. A child who constantly has to watch her surroundings cannot smile freely. The plane touched down on the runway as dawn broke. Thick fog enveloped the city, turning everything into blocks of gray. As soon as the wheels hit the ground, Ethan switched off airplane mode. His phone vibrated instantly. A call from the police landline. Ethan answered while still unbuckling his seatbelt. Caldwell here. Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. I'm Officer Miller. We performed a welfare check at your ex-wife's residence as requested. Ethan held his breath. What did you find? Everything appeared normal, sir. Officer Miller's voice was even bearing the weary tone of a night shift officer dealing with minor issues. Mrs. Cole answered the door. She was very cooperative. We did a preliminary check of the home. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of any physical confrontation. What about my daughter? Did you see her? Ethan hurried out of the jetway, passing passengers ahead of him, who were slowly ambling along. Yes, we saw the young lady. How was she? Did you speak to her? She was sleeping in her room. Mrs. Cole allowed us to look in. She was sound asleep, tucked in neatly, and the room was tidy and cozy. We didn't want to wake a child at 3 a.m. just because of an unverified anonymous call. Ethan stopped in the middle of the airport lobby, the clatter of travelers' rolling luggage echoing in his ears. I am not anonymous. I am her father, and I told the operator she called me for help. Sir, Miller's voice became stiffer, tinged with annoyance. Mrs. Cole explained that your daughter has a history of sleepwalking and occasionally imagines situations that aren't real. She showed us medical records regarding the child's mild sleep disorder. It appears this is simply a family misunderstanding. Medical records? Ethan frowned. Marianne had never mentioned Lily having a sleep disorder. Officer Miller, did you separate the child to speak with her privately? Welfare check procedures require verifying the child's state without the presence of the suspected guardian. As I said, the child was sleeping soundly. Waking a child in the middle of the night for an interrogation when there are no clear signs of injury is unnecessary and can be emotionally harmful. We are not babysitters to resolve custody disagreements, Mr. Caldwell. This is not a custody dispute. We have filed a report. The matter is closed as no hazard found. Good day, sir." A long tone signaled the end of the connection. Ethan lowered his phone. A perfectly clean report. No trace. Had Marianne prepared a fake medical file, or had she actually given Lily something to make her quiescent when the officers arrived? He stood still, watching the flow of people. The police thought he was a paranoid ex-husband, jealous, or simply a nuisance. They saw a neat home, a gentle mother, and a peacefully sleeping child. But Ethan knew the cost of that all clear. He remembered the short video calls on the weekends. "Are you okay, Lily?" "I'm fine, Dad. How is school?" "It's going well." "Is Mom treating you well?" "Mom is very good to me." Pre-programmed answers. Quick nods that didn't allow for thought. Ethan had accepted them because it eased his conscience. It helped him believe that his decision to leave full custody to Marianne and only play the role of provider was the right one. He had purchased that false peace with his own emotional distance. Anger began to ignite, replacing the initial fear. He was more furious at himself for believing that performance for the last 3 years. Ethan walked directly to the rental car counter. He handed his platinum credit card to the agent. "Which car is the fastest and available right now?" "We have a black SUV, sir, but we need to complete the paperwork." "Make it as quick as possible." 10 minutes later, Ethan was behind the wheel of the rental, peeling out of the SeaTac parking lot. He entered Marianne's address. The car sped down the empty I-5 freeway in the early fog. Ethan pressed the accelerator. The speedometer needle gradually crept past 80 miles per hour. He was a man who obeyed rules. He had never gotten a speeding ticket. But today, those rules seemed utterly meaningless. If they wouldn't check, he would check himself. The scenery outside changed from gray concrete structures to the lush green trees of an affluent suburb. The neighborhood where Marianne lived was known for its tranquility and excellent security. The houses had perfectly manicured lawns, white picket fences, and pastel-painted mailboxes. A perfect veneer for the quintessential happy American family. Ethan turned onto the small, tree-lined street. Marianne's house appeared at the end of the road. It was a cream-colored 2-story mansion with a gray shingle roof. Marianne's car was parked in the driveway. The curtains on the second-floor window Lily's room were completely drawn. Not a single gap allowed light to pass through. Ethan pulled the car over to the curb and turned off the engine. The surrounding area was so quiet, he could hear the tiny clicking sounds of his car engine cooling down. There were no birds singing, no children playing, even though it was already past time for children to be getting ready for school. This silence did not feel peaceful. It felt like a burial site. Ethan opened the car door and stepped out. The cold wind snaked through his thin dress shirt, but he didn't feel the chill. The blood in his body was heating up. He quickly crossed the dew-soaked lawn, ignoring the elegantly winding stone path that led to the front door. His expensive leather shoes sank into the mud, leaving deep indentations. He stood before the thick oak door. No smart doorbell, no visible security cameras. Marianne always preferred absolute privacy. Ethan raised his hand. He didn't ring the bell. He didn't knock politely like a guest. Thud, thud, thud. He pounded his fist forcefully against the wooden surface. The sharp, jarring sound shattered the stillness of the entire neighborhood. A neighbor's dog began to yelp incessantly. Marianne opened the door. There was no answer. Ethan hammered again, harder. The door vibrated violently. "I know you're in there. Open the door before I have to breach this lock." Inside the house, a sound echoed. The hurried pounding footsteps of bare feet on a wooden floor rushing toward the front door. Ethan took a step back. His hands clenched, his chest heaving as he waited for whatever was about to emerge from behind that silent door. The oak door swung open just as Ethan's hand was lowering. The click of the deadbolt sounded sharp and cold. Marianne stood blocking the doorway. She was wearing a gray silk pajama, set her arms tightly crossed over her chest. Her light blonde hair was loosely tied back, but her face was completely alert. There was no sign of someone who had just been woken up in the early morning. Ethan paused for a beat. It had been 2 years since he had looked his ex-wife directly in the eye at this close range. Marianne had lost a lot of weight. Her cheekbones were prominent, making her eye sockets appear deeper. Those eyes looked at him like he was an intruder, without any warmth, without any surprise. Only the high alert of an animal defending its territory. "What do you think you're doing, Ethan?" Marianne didn't scream. Her voice was low-taut and pinned him down. "Move aside, Marianne." Ethan didn't argue. "I need to see Lily." "This is not a scheduled visit." Marianne stood firm, her feet unmoving. "You are harassing me. You show up here at the crack of dawn, pounding on the door like a lunatic and demanding to see her. Do you want me to call the police back again?" "Go ahead and call them." Ethan's voice was strained. "You call them here and tell them to explain why my daughter called me for help in the middle of the night." "Help?" Marianne let out a short, dry laugh. "Are you becoming paranoid, or is work stress making you hear voices? Lily is sleeping. She has been sleeping all along. You are the only one causing a commotion." Ethan didn't want to hear any more excuses. He moved forward. "Hey, you are not permitted to." Ethan slipped past Marianne's shoulder. He used his shoulder to gently push the door just enough to create an opening. Marianne stumbled backward, her hand reaching out to grab his shirt but missing. Ethan stepped directly into the foyer. The house smelled strongly of lavender-scented candles. Everything in the living room was arranged to an odd degree of neatness. No scattered toys, no misplaced shoes. The magazines on the coffee table were aligned perfectly at right angles. "Lily," Ethan called out loudly. His voice echoed in the stillness, bouncing off the bare walls. "Be quiet." Marianne ran after him, positioning herself in front of him. Her face was flushed with anger. "You are scaring her. You get out of my house right now. This is trespassing." "Lily, it's Dad." Ethan ignored her. He looked toward the staircase leading to the second floor. A small shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. Ethan stopped. Marianne also fell silent, spinning around to look at her daughter. Lily stood there gripping the wooden railing. She didn't look like she had just climbed out of a warm blanket. Lily was wearing buttoned-up pajamas fastened to the neck, her hair neatly combed and clipped to both sides. Her bare feet were pressed close together, her back rigidly straight. No 10-year-old wakes up in the early morning looking that perfectly composed, unless she had been awake and waiting for a very long time. "Lily," Ethan exhaled. He quickly walked toward the foot of the stairs. Lily didn't run down to embrace him. She descended step by step, slowly, her eyes glued to the floor. When she reached the bottom, she stood close to the living room wall, keeping a distance from both her father and mother. Ethan knelt on one knee on the cold wooden floor to bring his eyes level with hers. He tried to meet Lily's gaze, but she kept staring at the shoulder of his jacket. "I'm here, Lily." Ethan spoke, trying to keep his voice soft and calm so as not to startle her further. "You called me last night, right? You said you were scared. I'm here now. Tell me what happened." The silence stretched for a few seconds. Ethan clearly heard the ticking of the wall clock, counting the rhythm. He saw Lily's small hands clenched tightly, her nails digging into her pale palms. Lily took a breath, her large, round eyes darting quickly toward the area behind Ethan. "Lily, look at me." Ethan leaned over, blocking her view. "It's just you and me. You don't need to fear anyone. I will take you away right now if you want." Lily's lips parted. A flicker of hope shone in Ethan's eyes. She was about to speak. She was about to break this deadly silence. Ahem. A faint throat-clearing sound came from behind him, very subtle, just a normal sound of clearing one's throat. But its effect on Lily was like an electrical switch. Her shoulders immediately hunched. The emotion that had just sparked in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a lifeless haze. Lily straightened up her arms, hanging loosely at her sides in an obedient posture. "I'm fine." Lily's voice was monotone, neither high nor low, flowing like water down a drain pipe. "I just had a bad dream. I'm sorry for bothering you, Dad." Ethan was stunned. "Lily, it wasn't a dream. I heard your voice. You said Mom told you not to tell anyone." "I dreamed of a monster." Lily interrupted him, her eyes still fixed on a non-existent spot. "Mom came to sleep with me. I'm not scared anymore. You can go home now, Dad." Each word was perfectly rounded, polite and distant. That was not how a child speaks to her father. That was how an employee reads a report to her boss. Ethan stood up. Rage surged in his chest, hot and searing. He spun around to face Marianne. "What did you do to her?" Marianne smirked, a look of annoyance on her face. She stepped forward, placing both hands on Lily's shoulders. "You hurt her, Ethan," Marianne said. "She sleepwalks. The doctor told you that. You are overreacting to everything and disturbing our life." Marianne pulled Lily back a step toward herself. That act of possession drew a clear boundary right through the living room Lily belonged to her mother's side. Ethan saw the fear in his daughter's eyes, though her mouth said, "I'm fine." Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated, filled with desperate pleading. She was screaming in silence, but her body was obeying the command of the hand resting on her shoulder. "I am not letting this go." Ethan pointed his finger at Marianne. "I know you are hiding something." Are you threatening me in my own home?" Marianne raised her voice, this time intentionally louder. "I will report this to the judge. You are violating a court order, trespassing, and emotionally distressing both mother and daughter. You just wait for a subpoena." "I don't care about your subpoena." "Then do you care about the police?" Marianne pulled her phone from her pajama pocket, her finger hovering over the emergency call button. "You have 30 seconds to get out of here before I press this, and this time I will request a protective order. You will never be allowed within 100 meters of her again." Ethan looked at the phone in Marianne's hand, then at Lily. If the police arrived now, what would they see? An angry father shouting, a calm mother protecting her child, and a child confirming that, "I'm fine." He would lose, and if he lost this time, he would lose all rights to see his daughter permanently. A restraining order would be the end of all his efforts to rescue her. He couldn't play this hand without any cards. Ethan clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath, pushing his indignation down to the pit of his stomach. "Fine." Ethan's voice was low. "I'm going." He turned to Lily one last time. She was still standing in her mother's grasp, small and isolated. "Lily," he called out. She didn't look up. "I will be back, I promise." Marianne scoffed, gently pushing Lily toward the stairs. "Go up to your room, sweetheart." Lily obediently turned her back, walking up the stairs without a single glance at her father. Her small figure disappeared into the dim hallway of the second floor. Ethan gritted his teeth, turning and quickly walking out the door. He couldn't stay here for another second before his restraint shattered. He stepped out onto the porch. The cold air of the morning whipped his face but did not cool the heat inside him. Slam! The wooden door behind him closed forcefully. The sound of the deadbolt turning and locking. That dry, sharp noise seemed to sever the fragile connection that had just been established. Ethan stood isolated on the dew-soaked lawn. The house in front of him reverted to its frightening silence like an impregnable fortress. Inside, his daughter was a captive of her own silence. Ethan pulled out his phone. He opened his contacts and found the number of a private investigator a partner had recommended. He needed a different approach. This battle could not be won with fists or shouting. It required the patience of a hunter. The wooden door had closed, but the truth could not be permanently locked away. When the law sided with the false silence, Ethan was compelled to become a hunter instead of a compliant father. What would he uncover when he began to dig into the shadows behind Marianne's facade of perfection? Ethan didn't return to Seattle. He sat in his rental car parked in a secluded corner of the Days Inn hotel parking lot, 2 miles from Marianne's house. The engine was off, but the heat from the hood still fogged the windshield, blurring the view outside. He had called his assistant, canceling his entire schedule for the week. For the first time in 10 years of running his company, Ethan didn't care about the quarterly financial report or stock market fluctuations. Those numbers were meaningless when juxtaposed with his daughter's frightening silence this morning. He spent all of Sunday in the hotel room, staring at a map of the area and the schedule for Roosevelt Elementary School, where Lily was a student. He couldn't launch another direct assault on Marianne's fortress. He needed information. Monday morning. Ethan parked in front of the school gate at 8 a.m. The school bell had just rung. The schoolyard was deserted with only the old security guard locking the side gate. He walked into the administrative office. The secretary looked at him over her thick glasses, her fingers clacking on the keyboard. "May I help you, sir?" "I am Ethan Caldwell, Lily Caldwell's father, 4th grade, room B. I need to see her homeroom teacher." The secretary stopped typing, pushing up her glasses. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but my name is on the second line of the emergency contact and custody papers. You can check the system now." Ethan placed his driver's license on the counter. 5 minutes later, he was sitting across from Mrs. Gable in the teacher's lounge. Mrs. Gable was a middle-aged woman with a kindly face, but a cautious look in her eyes. She knew about the divorce. Teachers in this small town always knew everything. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm a bit surprised to see you here. Usually Lily's mother communicates with the school." "I know. I've been neglectful for too long," Ethan admitted. He wasn't here to make excuses for himself. "I want to review her academic performance and health status, especially her school medical records." Mrs. Gable hesitated, fiddling with a red pen. "Lily's a good student. She doesn't cause trouble and her grades are always above average. It's just what? She's very quiet. During recess, Lily usually sits alone reading on the bench instead of playing tag with the other children. I always thought it was just her introverted personality." "May I see the medical logbook?" Mrs. Gable stood up and walked to the gray filing cabinet in the corner of the room. She pulled out a thick yellow binder and placed it in front of Ethan. Ethan flipped through the pages. The handwritten entries were consistent. September 12th. Stomachache, spent 1 hour in the nurse's office. September 19th. Headache, excused from PE. September 26th. Nauseous. October 3rd. Stomachache. Ethan's finger stopped. He quickly flipped through the next pages. A pattern emerged as clear as day. They all fall on a Monday. Ethan looked up. Why is she always sick on Monday mornings? Mrs. Gable looked at the book, looking puzzled. I never noticed the day pattern. Children often get minor illnesses when the weather changes, or if they overindulge on the weekend. It's not a minor illness. Ethan closed the book. Mr. Caldwell, are you suggesting? Thank you, Mrs. Gable. Ethan stood up. He didn't want to explain further. He needed to speak to someone else. He walked into the hallway, bumping into a young man carrying a tall stack of books. It was Mark, the school counselor. Ethan had seen his name on the staff list in the main lobby. Excuse me. Mark steadied the stack of books. Are you a parent? I am Lily Caldwell's father. Mark froze. His eyes changed from courteous to curious and slightly cautious. Lily. Ah, the girl in 4B. I remember her. Mark placed the stack of books on a long bench. She rarely comes down to the counseling office. But there was one time... Which time? Ethan asked immediately. Mark looked around the empty hallway, then lowered his voice. About 2 months ago, she snuck into my office during lunch break. She didn't ask about bullying or grades. She asked me a very strange technical question. What did she ask? She asked, "Mr. Mark, how can I make a phone call without it showing up on my mom's bill?" Ethan felt like someone had just delivered a strong punch to his gut. "What did you tell him?" I told her there was no way unless she used a prepaid phone or a public phone. She nodded, looked very disappointed, and left right away. I meant to report it to the family, but I just thought she was curious about calling a boyfriend or something. Kids nowadays grow up fast. Not a boyfriend. Ethan's voice was tight. "Thank you, Mark." Ethan quickly walked out of the school. The harsh midday sun shone directly into his eyes, but he didn't feel the glare. Everything was slowly becoming clear in his mind. He got into the car and closed the door firmly. The cramped space of the car offered a false sense of security. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened his family's telecom account management app. He paid for the family plan, which included Marianne's number and the home landline. He scrolled back through the call history from the past 3 years, hundreds of calls, none lasting more than 2 minutes. Before, Ethan had always thought Lily was a playful child who didn't like long phone conversations with her boring, distant father. He always ended the call with, "Go play now, I won't bother you anymore." And Lily always replied, "Yes, Dad." Now he understood. She wasn't eager to play. She was being timed. Each of those brief calls was a time Lily had to watch the clock. Marianne might have been standing right there, arms crossed, checking her watch, or she would check the phone bill at the end of the month. Lily's question to Mark was not innocent curiosity. It was a desperate attempt to find a secure line of communication. Ethan leaned his head against the steering wheel. A wave of guilt flooded his chest, tasting bitter in his throat. The phone on the passenger seat vibrated with a schedule reminder. The words on the screen, "Winter break, pick up Lily 3:00 p.m. Tuesday." Ethan lifted his head. Tomorrow. According to the court ruling 3 years ago, he had the right to pick up Lily for 2 weeks during the winter break and 2 weeks during the summer break. Marianne had never violated this schedule. She adhered to the law perfectly, so no one could find fault. But this time would be different. This time, he wasn't coming to pick her up as a guest. He was coming to take her out of there. 3:00 on Tuesday afternoon. The gate of Roosevelt Elementary School was packed with cars. Large SUVs lined up in long queues waiting to pick up students. This was the typical pickup culture, orderly, safe, and highly controlled. Ethan didn't wait in line in his car. He parked in the outer lot and walked to the waiting area. The dismissal bell rang. The large doors opened and hundreds of children poured into the yard like bees swarming out of a hive. The sounds of laughter, shouting, and calling names filled the air. Ethan leaned against a lamppost, scanning the crowd. He saw Lily. She walked out last separate from the bustling crowd. Lily carried her worn pink backpack, her head bowed, her hands gripping the straps tightly. She walked straight toward the preferred parking area where the earliest parents were waiting. A familiar silver sedan pulled to a stop right in front of Lily. The car window rolled down. Marianne was behind the wheel, wearing large sunglasses that covered half her face. She didn't get out of the car, just tilted her head to motion for Lily to get in. Lily reached out to open the back door. "Lily," Ethan called out. He stepped out from behind the lamppost, his long strides cutting across the distance between him and the car. Lily flinched, pulling her hand back as if touching fire. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. Marianne took off her sunglasses. She glared at Ethan through the lowered car window. "What in the world are you doing here?" Marianne hissed. "It's not the weekend." Ethan didn't answer Marianne. He walked straight up next to Lily, placing his hand gently on her backpack. Not on her shoulder, but on the backpack, a safe, non-threatening contact. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm here to pick you up today." "Are you insane?" Marianne opened the car door and stepped out. She slammed the door shut, the loud noise making a few nearby parents turn to look. "Stay away from her. I told you I will call the police if you harass me again." Marianne rushed forward, grabbing Lily's wrist tightly, pulling her forcefully toward herself. "Get in the car now, Lily." Lily stumbled with her mother's pull, her face pale. She didn't dare look at her father, nor did she dare resist her mother. Ethan took a step forward, blocking Marianne's line of sight. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. He opened it, holding it out straight in front of his ex-wife. "Today is December 18th. Ethan's voice was calm but loud and clear enough for those standing nearby to hear. "According to ruling number 402 of the Seattle Family Court, my winter break custody time begins this afternoon at 3 o'clock. She's sick." Marianne changed her tone, trying to sound worried. "She needs rest in her familiar home. You don't know how to care for a sick child, Ethan." "I will take her to my own doctor." Ethan didn't lower the paper. "And if you don't release her hand right now, I will consider this an act of obstruction of legal visitation rights. At that point, the police will come, but it will be to issue a report against you." The air around them was tense as a guitar string. The other parents began to whisper and point. Marianne hated being the subject of gossip. She valued her reputation more than anything. Marianne gritted her teeth, loosening her grip. Her fingers left red marks on Lily's pale, thin wrist. "Fine." Marianne bent down, whispering something quickly into Lily's ear, her eyes still challenging Ethan. Marianne released her grip. Her fingers left faint red imprints on Lily's pale skin. The little girl climbed into the back seat of Ethan's car, huddling in the farthest corner against the window on the opposite side. Ethan closed the car door, separating his daughter from the woman standing with crossed arms on the curb. He got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The car pulled away, leaving the school and the mother watching them through dark sunglasses in the rearview mirror. "What did Mom say to you?" Ethan asked, looking into the rearview mirror. Lily flinched. "Lily?" She looked down at the backpack on her lap, her hands fiddling with the scratched plastic zipper. She said, "Have a good time on my trip." Ethan gripped the steering wheel slightly. A clumsy lie. Children don't know how to lie. They only repeat what adults force them to say. He reached over and turned on the radio, letting soft jazz music fill the oppressive silence in the car. Ethan's apartment was on the 25th floor of a glass tower overlooking Seattle Bay. The place was vast, modern, and cold. The oak floors were highly polished. The minimalist furniture was in tones of gray and white. Everything had its fixed place, just like its owner. Ethan opened the door and placed his keys in the ceramic bowl on the console table. "Come on in. Make yourself at home." Lily stepped inside. She stood awkwardly on the doormat for a long time. Then she slowly took off her shoes. Ethan watched her out of the corner of his eye as he hung up his coat. Lily didn't kick off her shoes like other children. She bent down and used her hands to neatly align her sneakers against the edge of the wall. The toes pointed outward parallel to each other, exactly the same distance from the edge of the mat. After arranging them, she smoothed out the laces. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked. "Shall I make something to eat?" "Yes, please," Lily replied, still standing in the same spot, her hands clasped in front of her. "You can sit on the sofa, watch TV, or do whatever you like." Lily nodded. She walked to the large leather sofa in the middle of the room. Ethan went into the kitchen. He needed some caffeine to clear his head after a stressful day. He poured coffee beans into the grinder and closed the lid. His finger pressed the button. The shrieking noise of the grinder echoed, shattering the apartment's quiet. In the living room, Lily let out a small, choked cry. Ethan spun around. He saw his daughter was no longer sitting on the couch. She had slid down to the floor, curled up into a tight ball. Lily's hands covered her head, blocking her ears. Her knees pulled up to her chest. Her whole body was shaking. It was a defensive reflex, a natural and swift reaction that required no thought. It only appeared in those accustomed to being suddenly attacked by noise or anger. Ethan immediately switched off the grinder. The room returned to silence. He quickly walked into the living room, kneeling on the floor a short distance from her. "Lily, it's Dad. It's just the coffee grinder." Lily peeked up with one eye, then slowly lowered her hands from her head. Her face was ashen. Her breathing was still ragged. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered, her voice weak. "I thought—" "You thought what?" Lily pressed her lips together and shook her head. She slowly got up, brushing off her clothes, even though the floor was perfectly clean. She sat back on the edge of the sofa, returning to her former posture, as if nothing had happened. "I'm sorry for making noise." Ethan looked at her, his chest constricting. He wanted to hug her, but he knew a hug right now might frighten her more. He stood up and returned to the kitchen. He didn't grind the coffee. He poured himself a glass of water. His hand trembled slightly as he held the glass. Dinner was consumed in a heavy atmosphere. Ethan made mashed potatoes and steak, a dish Lily used to love when she was 5. He placed the plate of food in front of her. Lily picked up the knife and fork. The way she held the knife was strange, tight, and tense. She began to eat. Lily ate very fast. She cut the meat, put it in her mouth, chewed quickly, and swallowed. After each bite, her eyes darted up to look at Ethan, then immediately back down to her plate. She ate as if someone was about to snatch the food away at any moment. 15 minutes later, Lily's plate was 2/3 empty. Her eating speed slowed. Ethan saw her begin to struggle to swallow. Lily's face was flushed, her throat moving with difficulty after each swallow. She was full, maybe even overly full, but her hand still cut the next piece of meat. "Lily." Ethan put his fork down. Lily flinched, and the piece of meat on her fork dropped onto the porcelain plate with a clatter. "Yes? Are you full?" I can still eat," Lily said, picking up her fork again, trying to spear the meat. "No." Ethan reached out and gently pulled her plate away. "You are full. Look at you, you're struggling to swallow." "But Mom said—" Lily stopped, her eyes wide with panic for having slipped up. "Mom said what?" Ethan asked, his voice low, trying to contain the anger that was rising up. "I have to eat it all." Lily hung her head. "I can't leave any. Food costs money. Leaving leftovers is wasteful." Ethan looked at the remaining steak on the plate. He remembered the financial reports. He sent Marianne $5,000 every month just for living expenses for their daughter, not including tuition and medical care. That amount was enough to feed a whole soccer team. Yet Marianne taught her that leaving a piece of meat was an unforgivable sin. "There's a different rule at my house," Ethan said firmly. "The rule is your body is yours. When your stomach says enough, you stop. No matter how much is left on the plate, I will never scold you for being full." Lily looked at him, suspicion evident in her eyes. She didn't believe him. For the past 2 years, she had lived under a different, much harsher set of rules. Ethan stood up, taking the plate of food straight to the trash bin. He scraped the leftovers into it in front of her. Done. No one is penalized. Lily watched him, her shoulders seeming to drop slightly. The tension eased about a millimeter. After dinner, Ethan sat in an armchair reading a book. He didn't turn on the TV or music. He wanted to create a silent yet safe space. No more sudden noises. Lily sat on the sofa, flipping through a comic book Ethan had recently bought. But she wasn't reading. Her eyes kept darting around the room, looking at the doors, looking at the clock. Suddenly, Lily put the comic book down and stood up. She walked to stand neatly in front of Ethan. Ethan looked up from the page. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Dad," Lily mumbled, "may I be excused to use the restroom?" Ethan froze. The book in his hand felt heavy. In her own father's house, a child had to ask permission to address the most basic human need. Ethan closed the book. He looked directly into her eyes. "Lily, listen to me." She flinched, waiting for a judgment. "In this house and anywhere you are with your dad," Ethan spoke slowly, emphasizing each word, You never have to ask permission to use the restroom. You don't need to ask permission to get a drink of water. You don't need to ask permission to sneeze or cough. Do you understand? Lily blinked. But if you're busy, even if I were meeting with the President of the United States, if you need to go to the restroom, you go. No need to ask. Lily stood stunned for a moment. This concept of freedom was too foreign to her. Finally, she gave a slight nod, then turned and walked toward the bathroom. Her footsteps were still cautious, but no longer as rigid as they were this afternoon. Ethan watched her small back. He realized Marianne wasn't just controlling Lily's behavior. She had broken her will. She had turned his daughter into a robot programmed for submission. And this reprogramming would be harder than any business project he had ever undertaken. Later that night, the clock showed 11 p.m. Ethan walked a circuit around the house to check the doors and windows. He turned down the hallway lights, leaving only a warm yellow glow to guide the way. He paused in front of the guest bedroom where Lily was sleeping. The door was slightly ajar. Ethan intended to close the door fully against the draft, but he stopped. In the absolute stillness of the night, his hearing became more acute than ever. Zip. A sound came from inside the room, very faint, short, and sharp. It was the sound of a zipper being pulled. Ethan held his breath. He pressed against the wall next to the doorframe, listening. Following the zip sound was the rustling of nylon fabric rubbing together. Then a tiny clicking sound, like someone trying to pry open a hard plastic lid. Lily wasn't asleep. She was doing something in the dark, and this stealthy action reminded Ethan of the distressed call from that rainy night. Her fear had not vanished when she left her mother's house. It had followed her neatly tucked away in that worn pink backpack. Ethan took a deep breath. He couldn't stand idly by anymore. He needed to know what that secret was. He placed his hand on the doorknob, gently pushing the door inward. Ethan stood still by the doorframe, his hand still resting on the cold metal knob. He tapped lightly on the door twice. "Lily, may I come in?" There was no answer. Ethan pushed the door open and stepped inside. The faint yellow light from the hallway cast a long streak onto the bed. Lily was lying on her side facing the wall. The blanket was pulled up to her chin. Her breathing was unnaturally even. Ethan walked closer. His eyes settled on the pillow. Right next to Lily's head was the worn pink backpack. She was hugging it as if it were a teddy bear. One of the backpack straps was loosely wrapped around her wrist. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sank under his weight. Lily gave a slight start but kept her eyes tightly shut. Her eyelashes fluttered. "I know you're awake," Ethan said. Lily slowly opened her eyes. She didn't turn around, only peeked at him with a look of fear. Her small hand instantly tightened its grip on the backpack strap, pulling it closer to her chest. "Let me see it." Ethan held out his hand. Lily shook her head, her lips pressed firmly together. "I won't take it away. I just want to see what you were keeping." Ethan didn't wait for her permission. He reached out and grabbed the other backpack strap. Lily held on for a moment, her wide eyes examining him. Seeing that Ethan didn't look angry, her fingers slowly loosened their hold. Ethan lifted the backpack onto his lap. It was very light. It was almost empty inside, containing only a few old clothes and a broken box of crayons. He slid his hand into the main compartment. His fingers fumbled down to the bottom of the bag. The lining fabric there was torn along a small seam, the edge fraying. Beneath the lining, his hand touched something hard, rectangular, and cold. Ethan pulled the object out. It was an old Samsung flip phone, the kind that had disappeared from the market a decade ago. The silver plastic casing was scratched and worn, the numbers on the keypad almost completely faded. Lily sat bolt upright, pulling her legs up to her chest in the corner of the bed. She looked at the phone in her father's hand as if it were a bomb about to explode. "It was... my friend gave it to me," Lily said quickly, her voice tiny. "I'm sorry. I know Mom forbade it." Ethan didn't reply. He flipped the phone over in his hand. It was unusually light. He used his thumb to push the sliding cover up. He pressed and held the power button. The tiny LCD screen lit up with a faint blue light. The startup logo appeared slowly. He flipped the phone over and pried off the battery cover. The SIM card slot was empty. "It doesn't work, Lily," Ethan said. "You can't make a call without a SIM card." "I know." Lily lowered her head, her hand fiddling with the edge of the blanket. I just kept it." Ethan replaced the battery. He went into the contacts menu. The list was empty. Only one number was saved under the name Dad, and the emergency number 911. No number for Mom, no numbers for friends. Ethan moved his finger down to the messages menu. Inbox empty. Outbox empty. He clicked on the drafts folder. The screen displayed a single unsent message. Ethan looked at the save date and time. 9:14 p.m., November 12th. Ethan's heart dropped a beat. That was the night of the rain. The night he received the call from the strange number. He pressed the select button to read the content. On the tiny screen, the message appeared consisting of just 2 words, "Daddy, please." Ethan stared at the pale blue screen. His thumb still rested lightly on the send key. The button was completely worn down, significantly dented compared to the other keys. He visualized his daughter hiding in the dark closet, holding this obsolete phone. She had dialed his number, typed the message, and hit the send button hundreds, thousands of times. Lily knew the phone didn't have a SIM card. She knew it couldn't connect to any cell tower, but she kept hitting the key. It wasn't communication. It was a prayer. This useless phone was the only place she dared to utter the word Dad without fear of her mother hearing. It was the black box recording the despair of a 10-year-old child. Ethan looked up. His vision blurred. Lily was looking at him, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her face was utterly still. There were no sobs, no distressed grimaces. She was crying in absolute silence, a habit deeply ingrained in her. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered, her voice fractured. "I tried to call for real, using a stranger's phone, but I was afraid Mom would find out. I just wanted to text Dad." "You don't need to apologize." Ethan placed the phone on the bed. He leaned forward, wrapping his arms around his daughter's shoulders. He pulled Lily into a hug. This time he didn't hesitate. He held her tight, feeling her small body shake in tremors. "Listen to me, Lily," Ethan said, his voice deep and husky, right next to her ear. "You never have to use this broken phone again. I'm here now. I'm holding you. You don't have to send draft messages anymore." Lily stiffened for a moment, then suddenly she broke down. A cry burst from her chest, loud and painful. Lily's 2 hands clung tightly to Ethan's shirt, her tiny fingers digging into his back. She buried her head in her father's shoulder, weeping uncontrollably, releasing all the suppression of the past 2 years. Ethan let his daughter's tears soak his shirt shoulder. He stroked her hair, his eyes staring blankly at the opposite wall. The pain in him was transforming into something else, colder, harder. He understood why Lily always said, "I'm fine," because she had no one to tell, "I am not fine." That night, Ethan sat by the bed until Lily fell asleep from exhaustion. He held her hand, watching her chest rise and fall rhythmically. The old phone lay abandoned on the bedside table, its screen dark. The next morning, Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the living room, looking down at the city of Seattle shrouded in early morning fog. In his hand was a cold cup of black coffee. Lily was still sleeping soundly in her room. For the first time, she had slept in past 8 a.m. Ethan set the coffee cup down. He picked up his phone and called Vance, the private investigator he had briefly contacted last week. "Caldwell here," Ethan said as soon as the other end answered. His voice was clear and sharp without any of the hesitation from the day before. "Hello, Mr. Caldwell. I'm still waiting for your formal instructions. I want you to start immediately, today." What do you need me to find evidence of an affair or hidden income?" Vance asked with the routine of his profession. "No." Ethan turned to look toward the hallway leading to Lily's room. "I want to know what my ex-wife has been doing for the past 2 years. I want to know where she goes, who she meets, how many times she has moved. I want to know why my daughter had to hide a toy phone in her backpack to pretend to call her father." "That sounds complicated. This will take time and won't be cheap." "I don't care about the cost," Ethan cut in. "I want you to dig up Marianne Cole's entire life. Find every crack, no matter how small. I need to know exactly what turned a mother into a warden." "Understood. I will send a preliminary report in 48 hours. During Vance's week of work, Ethan extended his leave. He tried to make up for Lily's lost time. He didn't take her to noisy amusement parks or crowded shopping malls. He chose quiet places with lots of green space. On Thursday afternoon, Ethan took Lily for a walk at Green Lake Park. Seattle was having a rare sunny day, and the lake shimmered with silver light. Other children were running and chasing each other on the lawn, shouting and laughing. Lily didn't join them. She walked close beside Ethan, her small hand tightly gripping his little finger. Lily didn't look at the lake or the swimming ducks. Her eyes constantly darted back and forth, scanning the parking lot and the road running along the park. "Do you want ice cream?" Ethan pointed to the ice cream truck in the distance. Lily flinched, looking up. "Huh. Chocolate ice cream, your favorite?" "Yes, please," Lily replied, but her eyes never left the road. Suddenly, Lily stopped. Her whole body stiffened as if splashed with cold water. Ethan followed her gaze. A silver sedan had slowed down to look for a parking spot. It looked exactly like Marianne's car. Lily let go of Ethan's hand and retreated behind his back. She bowed her head, her hands clutching the hem of his jacket. Her breathing began to become rapid. "It's okay." Ethan turned around, shielding her view. He put his hand on Lily's shoulder. "That's not Mom. Look at the license plate. It's an Oregon plate." Lily peeked through his hip. The car stopped. A man got out with a golden retriever. Lily's shoulders slumped. She let out a sigh of relief, but sweat was already beading on her forehead. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered. "I thought Mom found us." Ethan squatted in front of her. "Mom can't find you here. I turned off the phone's tracking. We are safe." Lily nodded, but her hand found his little finger and gripped it tighter than before. Ethan realized that Marianne didn't need to be physically present to control Lily. Her image was etched into her daughter's mind, turning every silver car, every phone ring into a potential threat. Lily was not living in the present. She was living in perpetual vigilance. Exactly 1 week later, Vance called. This time they met in Ethan's office during lunch break when all the employees were out. Vance tossed a thick yellow folder onto the glass desk. The sound of the paper hitting the desk was heavy. "You were right, and you were also wrong." Vance began pulling up a chair without waiting for an invitation. Ethan opened the folder. Covertly taken photos, bank statement copies, and scribbled notes were clipped together. "Wrong about what?" Ethan asked, his eyes quickly scanning the first page. "You suspected she didn't have anyone. It's true she doesn't have a boyfriend or a lover, but she also doesn't have friends, no colleagues, no book club, nothing." Vance pointed to a cash flow chart. "And you were wrong to think she was still working." Ethan frowned. "Marianne worked as an accountant for a logistics company. She still talked about work whenever I asked." "She was let go 24 months ago," Vance stated flatly. "The company downsized. Since then, she hasn't applied for a job anywhere. She lives entirely off your alimony." Ethan flipped to the next page, a list of home addresses. "She moved 4 times in 2 years. Vance explained. The first time was still downtown, the second time to the suburbs, the third and fourth times further and further out, more and more secluded. Every time she moved, she severed old neighborhood connections. Why, so no one knows what's going on behind the door, Vance shrugged. She's shrinking her world, and in that tiny world, there are only two residents, her and your daughter. Ethan pulled out a stack of photos clipped to the end of the file. The first photo was taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Marianne was sitting in a car parked on a street opposite Lily's school. The second, third, fourth photo, all from the same angle. Marianne sitting in the car wearing sunglasses, holding a small pair of binoculars pointed directly at the school playground. "What is she doing there?" Ethan asked, his voice chilling. "Observing," Vance replied. "She goes there during every recess. She doesn't pick up her daughter, doesn't go into the school, just sits there and watches. I asked the school security guard. They thought she was just an overly anxious parent and didn't intervene. But she was there every day, Ethan. Morning, noon, and afternoon." Ethan looked at the enlarged photo of Marianne's face. Despite the sunglasses, her facial muscles were tense. She wasn't watching her child play with a loving gaze. She was supervising, like a warden watching her prisoner walk in the prison yard. "She doesn't physically abuse the child," Vance said, his voice lowering. "I found no evidence of physical harm, no hospital records of injury, no shouts of abuse heard by neighbors. Lily is always well-dressed and her grades are good." "But this is worse than abuse." Ethan threw the stack of photos onto the table. "She is turning the child into a possession. She is isolating her, making her believe the outside world is full of dangers and only her mother can protect her." Vance sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I have to warn you about this, Ethan, as someone who's been in this profession for 20 years. Go ahead." This file, Vance tapped the folder, is gray. It's neither black nor white. In court, Marianne's lawyer will twist it into evidence of great maternal love, a mother who sacrificed her career to fully dedicate herself to her child, a worried mother who watches her child's every step. Family court likes mothers like that. They won't terminate custody just because the mother loves her child too much. "Love," Ethan gave a cold laugh. "This isn't love. This is parasitism. She is feeding off the child to fill her own emptiness. You know it. I know it. But the law needs evidence of harm. If Lily has no bruises, you will have a very difficult time winning. If you file a lawsuit, she will play the victim being bullied by a wealthy ex-husband, and you could lose your current visitation rights altogether." Ethan stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window. Seattle was bustling below him. He saw his reflection in the glass. A successful man with money, with power, yet he had allowed his daughter to live in a hell on earth for the past 2 years because of his own naivety. He couldn't use money to solve this. He couldn't use force. He had to use Marianne's own weapon against her psychology. "Thank you, Vance. You did good work." "What are you going to do?" Vance stood up, grabbing his coat. "I won't sue her for abusing the child." Ethan turned around, his eyes resolute. "I will prove that her love is a type of poison, and Lily is slowly dying from it." Vance nodded, not saying anything more, and quietly left the room. Ethan sat down. He opened a drawer and took out the business card of Sarah, the best and most ruthless family lawyer he knew. He dialed the number. The phone rang twice before someone answered. "Law office of Sarah speaking." "Sarah, it's Ethan Caldwell." His voice was decisive and sharp. "Prepare the lawsuit. I want full custody, and find me the state's top child psychological evaluator immediately." Ethan hung up his hand, resting on the gray file. This battle wouldn't be fought with fists. It would take place in closed rooms where scars that don't bleed would be brought to light. Would a file without any visible bruises be compelling enough to sway the court? Ethan was betting everything on a legal game where the line between maternal love and emotional confinement was extremely delicate. The battle to reclaim his daughter's spirit was just beginning. Sarah flipped the final page of the detective's report, the paper rustling dryly in the quiet office. She adjusted her glasses, looking at the flip phone lying alone on the glass table. "Ethan, I have to be straightforward." Sarah leaned back in her leather chair, her finger tapping lightly on the table. "This file isn't strong enough. The family court doesn't care about feelings. They care about injuries. No bruises, no emergency room records. We're walking a tightrope." Ethan sat opposite her, his hands clasped on his lap. He looked out the window where the King County Courthouse stood majestically across the street. "I can't wait until she has an injury." Ethan turned back to Sarah. "You saw the draft message. She is calling for help. If I send her back there, it might be too late next time." "I understand, but the opposing counsel won't stay put. They will tear you apart for harassment and child abduction." Sarah pushed the stack of documents toward him. "This is the emergency petition to modify custody. If we lose, you could lose even your weekend visitation rights." "Are you sure about this?" Ethan picked up the pen. He didn't reread the clauses. His signature was firm and sharp on the final line. "File it." 3 days later, courtroom number 4. The air in the room was heavy with the smell of disinfectant and tension. Marianne sat at the defendant's table. She wasn't wearing designer dresses or expensive jewelry as usual. Today, Marianne wore a loose beige sweater, her hair tied back low, her face pale and makeup free. She looked like an exhausted, devoted mother worried about her child. Next to her sat Sterling, a female lawyer famous for her aggressive attack style in cases involving women's rights. "Your Honor." Sterling stood up, her voice loud and sharp. "My client, Mrs. Cole, has spent the last 2 years dedicating every minute to her daughter. Where was Mr. Caldwell during that time? He was busy with mergers and acquisitions. He was absent for 3 consecutive birthdays of his daughter." Sterling held up a stack of old calendars. "Now suddenly he appears using money to hire a detective to follow a single mother illegally trespassing and fabricating stories about psychological abuse. This is not about protecting the child. This is financial bullying." Marianne sat next to her, her shoulders shaking violently. She pulled out a tissue and dabbed her dry eyes. "I just want to protect Lily." Marianne sobbed, her voice breaking at just the right moment. "She is the only reason I live. He wants to take her away just to punish me." Judge Miller, an elderly man with thick eyebrows, turned to look at Ethan. His eyes were full of suspicion. In the eyes of the court, the mother always had a natural advantage, especially one who looked so frail. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge spoke, "your attorney mentioned a phone. Where is the evidence?" Sarah stood up, presenting the evidence bag containing the old Samsung phone. "Your Honor, this is the phone we found in Lily's backpack. It contains a draft message begging her father for help." Attorney Sterling chuckled, a short, sarcastic laugh. "Your Honor, this object was found at Mr. Caldwell's house, unilaterally provided by Mr. Caldwell. No SIM card, no network history. Who can prove that Lily wrote that message? Or did Mr. Caldwell personally type it in to fabricate a story?" Ethan clenched his hands under the table. His nails dug deep into his flesh. Their audacity made his blood boil. He wanted to stand up, wanted to scream at Marianne to stop the performance. But Sarah's hand placed on his arm, pressing down firmly. Silence, her grip reminded him. Losing control means losing the case. "Mrs. Cole asserts she has never seen this object," Sterling continued. "Lily is a good, obedient child who never hides anything from her mother, unless someone is influencing her." Judge Miller banged his gavel, cutting off the argument. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is a situation of, he said, she said," he said slowly. "The plaintiff alleges psychological control. The defendant alleges harassment. I cannot make a ruling based on speculation." The courtroom fell silent. Ethan held his breath. "I am issuing an order for a temporary delay in the custody ruling," the judge announced. "The court will appoint an independent psychological expert. Dr. Aris will conduct a comprehensive evaluation of Lily Caldwell. Until the results are available, the child will temporarily stay with her father to ensure the objectivity of the evaluation, but the mother has supervised visitation rights." The sharp sound of the gavel hitting the wood echoed loudly. Ethan let out a relieved breath. He hadn't won, but he had bought time. Lily would not have to go back to that house tonight. The court session adjourned. Ethan and Sarah gathered their files and walked out into the cold marble corridor. Marianne was waiting near the elevator doors. Her lawyer had already left. As Ethan walked past, Marianne stepped forward, blocking his path. She no longer looked haggard and miserable as before. Her back was straight, her chin slightly raised. Her eyes, red from crying, were now dry and sharp as razor blades. Marianne leaned close to Ethan's ear. The strong scent of lavender perfume wafted into his nostrils. "Do you think a psychologist will help?" Marianne whispered, the corner of her mouth curling into a faint smile. "She is mine, Ethan. I trained her very well. She will never betray me." She stepped back, adjusted her sweater collar, then turned and walked into the elevator. The metal doors closed, concealing that smug smile. Ethan stood rooted to the spot in the busy hallway. A chill ran down his spine. Marianne wasn't afraid of the truth. She believed her control had become so deeply ingrained in Lily's soul that the truth could never escape. He looked at Sarah. "Prepare for the evaluation," Ethan said, his voice low. "We are not just fighting a lawyer. We are fighting the fear in her head." A week passed by heavy as lead. Ethan drove Lily to the office of Dr. Aris in the quiet Westlake area. Marianne was already waiting there. She sat in the corner of the waiting room, her hands tightly gripping her purse strap, her eyes fixed on Ethan as soon as he walked in. Dr. Aris appeared. He was a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and a calm demeanor. "I will speak with Lily alone," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. "The father and mother are welcome to wait outside." Marianne shot to her feet. "She's very shy. She needs me nearby." "Court policy, Mrs. Cole." Dr. Aris didn't look at her, his hand holding the door open for Lily. "Alone." Lily bowed her head quickly, stepping across the threshold like a small, elusive cat. The thick wooden door closed. The click of the deadbolt sounded, separating the world of adults and the child. Marianne sank into the chair. She didn't read a magazine, didn't check her phone. She sat upright, her eyes glued to the brass doorknob as if her will could melt it to see inside. In the consultation room, the space was warm, with a fuzzy rug and brightly colored abstract paintings. Lily sat huddled in the mustard yellow armchair, her feet dangling without touching the floor. Dr. Aris didn't sit behind his desk. He pulled up a small chair and sat facing Lily, maintaining a comfortable distance. He placed a blank white sheet of paper and a box of colored pencils on the low coffee table between them. "Draw for me the place where you feel safest," he said. Lily picked up a black crayon. She didn't draw a house with a chimney. She didn't draw a bedroom. She drew a completely sealed square. Then she colored the entire inside of the square black. "Where is this?" Dr. Aris asked. "The box," Lily replied faintly. "In the closet. It's dark and quiet there." Dr. Aris nodded. He opened a drawer and took out an object wrapped in clear plastic. He placed it on the table right next to the drawing of the black box. the old Samsung flip phone. Lily's shoulders jumped. She pulled her hands back, hiding them behind her. "The court sent this to me," Dr. Aris said, his voice still even and non-judgmental. "They said you composed a message on it. Daddy, please." Lily looked at the phone, then at the doctor. Her lower lip began to tremble. "Did you want to send it?" Lily didn't answer. Tears started to roll down her cheeks. Dr. Aris pushed the tissue box toward her. "Why didn't you talk to your mom? She's right in the next room." Lily looked up, her eyes wide with terror. Her next question echoed in the quiet room, carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds. "If I tell the truth, will Mom know?" Dr. Aris looked straight into her eyes. "No. What you say in this room is a secret between me, you, and the judge. Your mom will not read it, will not hear it, and no one has the right to punish you for the truth. I promise." The commitment from an authority figure broke the emotional dam. Lily took a deep breath and a choked sob burst out. "Mom doesn't hit me," Lily said quickly, as if afraid she would change her mind. "But she turns off the lights." "Turns off the lights?" "She sits in the dark. She makes me sit with her. She cries for hours. She says Dad is a bad person, he abandoned us. She says if I like Dad too, she will die." Dr. Aris quickly jotted notes in his notebook. "Every time I laugh or want to go play, Mom goes silent." Lily continued, her tears falling heavily onto the drawing paper. "She doesn't scold. She just looks at me like I hurt her deeply. She doesn't talk to me all day. That silence. It's more frightening than shouting." "So what do you have to do?" "I have to be good. I have to say I'm fine. I have to hate Dad for Mom to be happy." Lily bowed her head. "I'm so tired. I just want to hide in the box." Dr. Aris stopped writing. He looked at the 10-year-old child in front of him. This was not a love child. This was an emotional hostage. Marianne had turned her daughter into a trash can to dump all her own bitterness and hatred, forcing the child to bear the responsibility of making her mother happy. He wrote the final conclusion in the file: compulsive emotional dependency syndrome. The current living environment is suppressing the child's independent personality. He closed the file. "We're done, Lily. You were very brave." Dr. Aris stood up, motioning for Lily to follow. He opened the room door. The hallway outside was completely silent. Ethan and Marianne both stood up. Dr. Aris didn't look at Marianne. He placed his hand on Lily's shoulder, guiding the little girl directly toward the child advocate, standing by the elevator, completely bypassing the mother who was reaching out to embrace her. He handed the file to the advocate. "Immediate separation," he said loudly enough for the whole hallway to hear. Marianne froze. Her hand was still suspended in the air. She looked at Lily, then at the file being handed over. She understood what had just happened. Her control had been shattered. "No!" Marianne screamed. A piercing, wild shriek tore through the decorum of the office area. She lunged toward Lily like a wounded animal. "She's lying. You are forcing her to lie. Lily, come here to Mom right now." Marianne's piercing scream in the clinic hallway was the final sound that concluded the 6-month custody battle. Judge Miller needed no further evidence. He witnessed the mother's clear psychological instability right in front of law enforcement officers. The verdict was delivered on Friday morning. Ethan was granted full custody. Marianne was ordered to attend mandatory psychological therapy for 52 weeks. She was only permitted to see Lily twice a month at the court-supervised visitation center under the observation of a social worker. That weekend, Lily moved permanently into Ethan's apartment. Ethan didn't hire a moving service. He wanted to do this himself. Father and daughter unpacked each box together in Lily's new bedroom. Lily picked up the worn pink backpack. She opened the zipper and took out the old Samsung flip phone. Ethan paused, holding his breath as he watched. He didn't intervene. This was her choice. Lily looked at the phone for a long time. Her thumb gently stroked the faded keypad. Then she walked to the trash can in the corner of the room. She let go of the phone. Clunk. The phone dropped to the bottom of the plastic bin. That dry sound marked the end of the unsent draft messages. Lily turned around, dusted her hands, and smiled at Ethan. "Dad, shall we put the books on the shelf now?" Lily asked. "Sure thing," Ethan replied, feeling half the burden lift from his chest. 2 years later. Ethan's high-end apartment no longer looked like an architecture magazine spread. The expensive oak floor had a few long scratches from Lily dragging her chair while drawing. The sleek stainless steel refrigerator door was now covered with note school schedules and crayon drawings held up by fruit-shaped magnets. This mess didn't bother Ethan. On the contrary, every time he saw a sneaker left in the middle of the floor or a half-empty glass of water on the table, he felt reassured. It proved that Lily was living, not just existing. Lily was now 12. She'd grown taller, and her short shoulder-length hair was styled with a sense of personality. She joined the school art club and had 2 close friends who often came over to play video games on weekends. Sunday afternoon, bright golden sunlight flooded the living room. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by colored pencils and large drawing paper. Ethan sat in his armchair, pretending to read a financial report, but his eyes were on his daughter. Lily was drawing with intense focus, the tip of her tongue slightly sticking out at the corner of her mouth, a new habit she comfortably expressed. "All done, Dad." Lily put down her pencil, gently blowing the eraser shavings off the paper. She picked up the drawing and walked up to Ethan. "Look at this, Dad." Ethan took the picture. It was a crayon drawing. In the picture, 3 people stood on a green lawn. In the middle was Lily. She drew herself smiling, her right hand tightly grasping the hand of the tall man next to her, Ethan. Lily's left hand hung naturally and loosely next to the woman in the blue dress, Marianne. In the picture, no one was turning their back on the others. Marianne stood there still, a part of the picture, but she was no longer touching Lily, no longer resting her hand on her shoulder to control her. Most importantly, no one had their mouth covered. Everyone had an open mouth, either smiling or speaking. Ethan looked closely at Lily's loosely hanging hand in the drawing. That was the most valuable detail. It represented equality. She didn't hate her mother, but she was no longer afraid of her. Lily was standing there on her own 2 feet. "What do you think, Dad?" Lily asked, her voice clear, expectant, but without anxiety. Ethan looked up at his daughter. He didn't compliment the drawing technique or the colors. He saw the truth Lily had just laid out on the paper. "I see freedom," Ethan said, his finger gently touching the drawing of the girl in the middle. "And I see a family that has found its footing." Lily's eyes crinkled with her wide smile. The smile reached the very depths of her eyes, brightening her crayon-smudged face. "Will you hang it up, Dad, over there?" Lily pointed to the most prominent empty spot on the living room wall, right next to his business achievement plaques. "Of course." Ethan stood up, holding the drawing. "That's exactly where it belongs." He watched his daughter run off to grab the tape, his heart filled with a sense of absolute peace. The silence in this house had died. Now the walls were beginning to speak. Ethan and Lily's story is a stark reminder that the deepest emotional distress often stems from control disguised as love. The biggest lesson here is financial provision and stable routines can never replace presence and empathy. Sometimes a child's loudest cry for help is not a scream, but a heartbreakingly quiet compliance. Learn to listen to what children do not say. Note: the story above is completely fictitious. The names, locations, and events have been constructed for the purpose of illustrating an educational and artistic message. Any resemblance to real persons or actual events is purely coincidental.